So, Gaëtan, could I just get you to introduce yourself, and then Guy Lonechild? Thanks.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Gaëtan Thomas. I'm a strategic advisor for McCarthy Tétrault for 5 years now, and I used to be the CEO of New Brunswick Power, chief nuclear officer before becoming president and CEO, and I was also chairman of the board of the World Association of Nuclear Operators, the Atlanta Center, which we sat on the world board as well. So, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much. And over to you, Guy.
All right. Good afternoon. Thanks very much, Alex, Chief Sam, and all that are here today. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you on behalf of our small but mighty organization called the First Nations Power Authority. We got our start in 2011 and cut our teeth on utility scale solar projects, and now operating in 5 different provinces. We work with 55 First Nations in the province of Ontario on energy efficiency as an example. Assisted in policy development in British Columbia and Alberta in terms of their power calls, and are soon to be making announcements on larger scale solar in Saskatchewan and hopefully wind in Manitoba in the very, very near future. But we pursued the nuclear space, and when I say space, the engagement space with Indigenous communities. And I think in 2018 in Calgary, we brought together a number of Indigenous stakeholders and government officials to have an initial conversation about this topic we're talking about today. So, yeah, glad to be here.
Great, thanks, and welcome, Guy. And online we have Brian Torrie, Director of Regulatory Affairs with the Canadian Nuclear Association. Brian, just a brief intro of yourself. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, we hear you.
Okay, there's a bit of a delay happening here, but I'll just go with it. Thanks for inviting me. I'm actually now here I'm the Vice President of Regulatory and Indigenous Affairs here at the Canadian Nuclear Association. I've been with the association about just over a year. Prior to that, I worked with CNSC in regulatory policy and environmental assessment, and in other places in the federal government. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Brian. And last but not least, Jay Khosla, the Executive Director of the Public Policy Forum.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and all the organizing that you and Chanda have done to get us to this point. Just briefly, beyond the role that you mentioned, which is with the Public Policy Forum, and that's Canada's largest independent think tank, just for everybody's information in case you didn't know, but I'm sure most people are aware. I was also a Senior Assistant Deputy Minister before I got here within the Privy Council office working on energy policy and economic policy for the country, number of big projects there. And prior to that, I was the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Energy at Natural Resources Canada. And one of my calling cards there was the Small Modular Reactor Roadmap. And I might refer to it because that goes all the way back to 2017. And I'm pretty much on about how Canada needs to move much more quickly in all of these spaces. But I also did the restructuring of the AECL to get it off the balance sheet of Canada. And I think that's another big thing we need to talk about. So I won't go too far into that. And just prior to that, I also set up the first major projects management office within the federal government. I was around 2012-13 in that time frame. I won't keep going through my biodata. Those 3 years just for.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. We've got a bunch of questions posted online, and I'm going to grab a couple of them to kick things off and ask the panelists, other than Arthur, to supplement the answers that Arthur provided. Thank you. Thank you for doing so. So it's really about safety and waste. Okay? You know, a lot of people, including nations I work with and FNCI, when you say nuclear, they think bombs and and bad radioactive stuff that make you sick. So, Arthur, you provided a bit of response. Thank you very much. But I'd like to hear a little more about safety and waste. Gaëtan's got the mic. Go.
Yeah, well, I'll start with that. Actually, I'm always concerned when I fly from New Brunswick to Vancouver because I'm more exposed to radioactivity than I am at the nuclear plant that I worked for many years. So, Arthur, thank you for those numbers. They're true. The fact about waste, I think you got to think about the size of the whole thing. It's a footprint, and our energy, nuclear energy, is actually the least carbon impactful because the power of that fission is in the thousands of times. Like we're talking massive heat generated by splitting atoms, and it's self-generated, like Dr. Sidham explained. So in terms of clean energy, it's cleaner than, from a life cycle footprint, cleaner than wind, cleaner than large hydro. The only thing that is considered renewable that actually does less carbon footprint on a life cycle is actually runoff the river hydros. And you have many of them here in BC. They are the least impactful from a carbon footprint. So now you got to deal with this fuel at the end. But when we look at the way that the Nuclear Waste Management Organization has really set that up with the engagement of the First Nation communities in Ontario, they've went through a long process of engagement and communication. And people say, what's the risk? Remember, all the spent fuel is being stored in communities today, in Ontario, in New Brunswick, near population, within, a kilometer from the plant. So, and there are really no issues. So this issue about, where would you have some thermodynamics will have some residual thing. You want it in your lungs, like the smog they had in Ontario and in New Brunswick before? Or do you want it in a safe space that we will design with communities, First Nation communities in Ontario, and put it back in the ground? So it's a non-issue, I tell you, with most people that are near a power plant because they do know the risk. We walk them around the containment site. They walk into our plants, and they realize that it's more dangerous to, if you're worried about radioactivity, it's more dangerous to fly from New Brunswick to Vancouver.
Thanks. Okay. Any of the other three want to add? Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's probably
Jay.
not that much more to add, but I do know that free, prior, and informed consent under Bill C-15, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, is a requirement for meaningful engagement. And so as Gaëtan talks about, that's ongoing now, and it will continue to be that way. The rights holders have special rights in Canada, and under various acts, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and, of course, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, all of the regulatory acts that are in place will help to safeguard. The one important part that we've been missing for so long in the development of our economy has been weaving in traditional knowledge. And so that's an important aspect of bringing more focus to what's the spiritual nature of this development and how can we actually make it stronger. And so that's often overlooked, but it's part of the development where First Nations see those as important aspects, where maybe as regulators or the rest of society does not. So there's a lot of really neat and interesting things, and I'll talk about that a bit later on in my presentation about a White Bear Rights Impact Assessment Framework. So Indigenous-led environmental assessments that will help to answer some of those questions from a different point of view.
Great, thank you. Jade?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you.
Three points really quickly. One, I hate to be a shill for my own work, but we wrote a pretty important report that they're going to circulate here called Build Big Things. You probably can't see it because of my backdrop, but I'm holding it up and I guess you can't see it, right? But and I only allude to it now because I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question fully. We argue in that report that four massive things need to come together for projects to move, and that really it's all about project and project-based development. One of those is financing and coordinated financing, and I think, frankly, safety and waste are part of that equation. Second is the regulatory framework, which was just alluded to terrifically, but it has to be efficient, effective. Third is Indigenous economic participation and consultation, and then fourth is looking at the project as a whole. It's not just an SMR in a site. It's actually how do you look at it with the transmission lines to the communities, et cetera, and that we call that enabling infrastructure. And so I would say that the financing piece, and I know we'll talk about this, is probably uppermost in our mind, and we're doing a report specifically on that coming out. We're working with OPG on it, and how do we put the capital stack together? I'll come back to that. But on safety and waste, I really do think we have to add the word timeline in here. And on safety, we have one of the world-class regulators in this country. It's called the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, as Brian knows. And not many other countries have that. And the reason we have that is because we're a tier one nuclear nation. And people look to the CNSC globally for advice on almost everything. So we have to pride ourselves. It's not like something new. We've been at this for a while, and I think that needs to be added in the mix. The second thing is, I think on the waste side, I was in NRCan in 2013-14 when we incepted the NWMO. And again, the timeline really bothers me here because they've had so many good false starts, and we're finally somewhere. We seem to be somewhere. And that's like 15 years in the making. But here's what people need to know about waste, mostly. It exists in this country. We have it because we're a tier one nuclear nation. Ontario is steeped in nuclear. So we have nuclear waste. It exists. It's above ground. And I think that's the main point. Most of it is stored above ground. The question is, do we want to do a better job at it? It's not necessarily that we're not partaking. We are. So it's how is it stored, I think, more than anything else. Hopefully that's helpful. Brian may want to pick up on some of that.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going next. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just to maybe emphasize a couple points, some of them like to follow up on Jay. First, just on the question of bombs and power, they're kind of brought up together when really you could argue they're quite unrelated. A bomb is built with enriched uranium and it's designed to explode, right? Whereas a power plant is built, like a Canadian CANDU plant is built with natural uranium, and it's designed with various systems to protect and keep it from exploding. It's not designed to explode. I think that's fundamentally how I would put it. And then you also have a whole international obligations that govern proliferation and things like that. So that's important to understand the relationship there. And when I think about what makes me feel safe, and everyone has a different feeling of what makes them safe. Often, we're dealing with perception here. Do we have a good regulator? As Jay said, yes, we do. We want to complain about the regulatory efficiency, I think, sometimes, but there are like 6,000 requirements out there for the industry to follow. Like, just try and compare that to any other industry. So if I had like a gold mine being built next to my house versus a nuclear power plant, what would I want to know? I'd want to know how it's regulated differently, right? So generally when a mine is built like that, there's ongoing regulation, but it's really at the front end. You do an environmental assessment. The federal government might be involved with the fish, the caribou, the birds protection, but you will never get the same level of public involvement you would get if it was a nuclear power plant. So there are staged licensing, construction, site preparation, construction, operation, and then decommissioning. You're going to have public hearings on every point of that as that facility evolves. You're going to have massive reporting on those 6,000 requirements, right? So that should make you feel safe. And then if you look at the track record too of the Canadian industry here, it's been safe for many, many years. And that's partly due to the learning from some of these events that people look at internationally, in Chernobyl, Fukushima. Those drove a lot of changes to improve the regulatory system here in Canada and keep it safe. So I think those are things to keep in mind when you talk about safety too. Thanks.
Great, thanks. I just want to shift gears here, and I'm setting you up for a later question, which is, if it works out all in the rest of Canada, what's going on in BC? But that's not my question right now. My question right now is the comparisons. Like, how do we compare nuclear small modular reactors or CANDU reactors? How can we compare them to other sources of energy in terms of scale and cost and permitting and all of that? Give us your perspectives. Gaëtan's grabbing the mic. Go, Gay.
Yeah, well, I think first we have to address what the issue is, okay? And the issue is the world is a complex geopolitical, mind-boggling thing right now. But 86% of the world is being powered with either oil, gas, or coal. 86%. In Canada, we have 82%, between 80 and 80, depending year to year, depending on the hydro production, non-emitting. So 86% emitting, 82% non-emitting. The reason for that is we are blessed with two very, very good industry. It's hydro. 3 provinces are basically almost 100% hydro, including this beautiful province. Then we have Ontario and New Brunswick, who feed 50% with nuclear and a bit of hydro, and New Brunswick 37% with nuclear. If it wasn't for those two, we would look similar to many other countries in the world. And net zero that everybody talks about, and I was on the net zero advisory body, is not possible without having all those resources tapped on. Canada has an advantage with the nuclear expertise. Look at Dr. Sidham from Saskatchewan. We have it in Ontario, we have it in New Brunswick, and we will have it in BC too, I predict, because the growth that we are talking about this morning in the load plan, I mean, I saw the BC hydro plan this morning going up by something like 20%, but everybody else in the world says it's going to be 2x or 3x by 2050. So does it mean that BC is not going to grow as fast as the other places in the world? Like, this is an issue. Electrification has been identified by my friend Linda as one of the solutions that we all agree, whether it's at the local level, at the world level. So the context of nuclear in terms of financing it, what other choice do we have? And now large hydro is comparable to, what I would say at least medium-sized small modular reactors. So the risk will become smaller as we get more and more of these things. The issue with just going with one strategy, the large reactors, is that it doesn't suit everybody. It doesn't suit everybody. Like in New Brunswick, we cannot go easily with a 1,000 megawatt unit at any given time that might take 12 years. Like the province doesn't have the capacity to finance that by itself. So the issue is we need some other nuclear solutions to combine or to add to the other two options in Canada is very well blessed with, hydro and other renewables. In the world, there is about 5% nuclear, 3% hydro. That means that God gave us a lot more in Canada than many other countries. And we have to really take into consideration all these options if we want to meet the load in the future. So financing, we were involved in financing in New Brunswick. Triple the cost, and when we did the first reactor, tripled, $500 million went to $1.5 billion. That was hard on a small province like New Brunswick. But I tell you, Richard Hatfield was a visionary to have actually accepted that solution, because where would New Brunswick be today without nuclear? We'd still be at 50, 60% fossil, natural gas and coal. We don't have the hydro that you have in BC and Quebec. So the reality of financing, when we did the refurbishment of Pointe-le-Pro, everybody went in the paper, $2.4 billion. But when we saw the Muskrat Fall project in Newfoundland go to something like $10 or $12 billion for the same output at Pointe-le-Pro, Pointe-le-Pro became instantly, to my board of directors, a very good investment. And I do believe that the SMRs are the future because they are scalable. Like Arthur said very well, they are factory fabrication prone. We can actually build them faster, put them together and we can put them in northern BC. We can put them not only in existing sites. I know everybody wants everybody at Point Lepreau in New Brunswick, but probably we should have one in northern New Brunswick that will bring possibly green hydrogen or clean hydrogen to be produced from the Port of Baldoon. The reason it can't be done today is because we don't have the capacity. So you need to distribute. And I want to go back to what Ron said earlier in terms of the very source. We have to also use it more wisely, the electricity. Like that's, to me, it's a big, so smart grids, the combination of following wind, solar, batteries. Canada is well positioned to be the best place in the world to have clean, effective electricity around the world. And in order for that to be advantageous to the world, we have to continue to export. And I know some of my colleagues on NZAB are not on board on that, but we have to export natural gas like you're doing here. Because natural gas at 25% will probably need to go to 37 to 40% to reduce the overall emissions in the world. Remember, oil and coal is 62%, and nuclear is only at 5% today. Hydro is at 3%. How are we going to triple that? How are we going to double that? We need all the cleanest source of generation that we can have in Canada can help the world reduce emissions.
Okay, thank you. Guy, you want to go next?
I would say that why small modular reactors? Because they're scalable. I come from a jurisdiction, Saskatchewan, that's a very small electricity grid. So that just happens to fit well with some of our load requirements. Replacing and transitioning from coal to natural gas to nuclear is the evolution. It is the future. And for so many reasons, we also need to make sure that we're cost competitive. And so we're exploring that right now with equity participation in Saskatchewan, where First Nations will actually take some of the risk. Leave our federal government funding, because we can't do this without the feds. So there's lots of cost factors that we have to consider. There are political considerations, there are economic and financial considerations, but we can't do this without the Indigenous people. And so we are on the cusp of doing some really good things, I think, in Ontario and New Brunswick and
So let me just push you a little bit on this, and then go to the folks on the screen. That if you think about the alternatives to nuclear, and there's renewables, they're cheaper to build. Sure. They're cheaper per megawatt hour. So what is it, and how do you compare? How does your community compare going with nuclear alternatives versus some of these other alternatives that don't have the same history?
We are huge supporters of all of the above. So the wind and the solar, battery storage. I think we say that we need it all sources of new electron generation. And so it's about capacity factor too. When you talk about grid resiliency and you talk about the need to balance loads and meet peak demand in various times of the day, there are certain technologies that do certain things. And so we just say we need it all. But for sure, nuclear power at 90 and 95% capacity factors is a significant economic opportunity for the entire country.
Thanks.
Which includes Indigenous communities.
Okay. So Jay, just picking up on this theme of financing and the overall cost. I haven't read Build Big Things yet, and I'm going to this weekend. Okay, as long as and we'll circulate it to everybody that's been participating here. But tell us, what do you see the hurdles are there, and how do we get over them?
Thanks, Alex. The good thing is that the Prime Minister read it and is following it, so I like that. That's where we got C5 and other things. Not to take too much credit, but I just want to step back because I really like Gaëtan's comments in particular about what is Canada as an energy nation, and I would argue as a mining, energy, and infrastructure nation, and we're pretty strong, right? We got strength all across the board. Energy, we should pride ourselves in that. Every province has a diverse set of asset bases on energy, and so it's not like we're not a tier 1 nuclear nation. We are. Like, we don't start from scratch here. And I think that's really important to go back through the history. We should pride ourselves. I'll go through some pros and then some potential cons, but we should pride ourselves on the fact that, we did the Avro era, and that got us into a space program. And, post World War II, we invested in nuclear heavily because of our activity. We punch way higher than our weight when you think about it, right? We have a small population base, a large land mass, and we're doing all these things. Hydro, amazing. I did the Lower Churchill restructuring 3 times, so I know all about it in depth. But we finally got it done, and it's an amazing project, believe it or not. So is Site C, for that matter. Like think about these things when we finally get them going. They're good. We should, and as far as being a tier 1 nuclear nation, we have all the capacity in the supply chain to get it done. That doesn't just happen overnight, right? So let's just start from strength. So we pride ourselves on that. But the other side of this is on SMRs in particular. There's a race, and we've been in the last decade or so losing this race. And that's because we have not targeted economic goals. Let's be honest. We did target environmental goals. That's great. I bet you everybody in the room could tell us we're not meeting our objectives at COP. But how many could say what our GDP trajectory is? And this is part of that. How many could say what's our investment trajectory? And it takes big investment to make this happen. And so another part of this is it's about strategic choices, as Gaëtan said. One thing that really bothers me in this space, really bothers me, is that, and Canadians need to be conversant, is you're quite right. We have 3 big hydro provinces, and yet we, in the last 2 years, are now a net importer of hydro. And why that is really terrible is because that's our battery. Honestly, if we would connect things properly, renewables, not renewables, we all know they're intermittent. Hydro provides a battery of sorts, and we're out of it. We're out of clean hydro, and that just tell you where the world's going. We were exporting a ton. We power up the island of Manhattan. The beauty of SMRs and nuclear writ large is it's a permanent source of power. Energy security is there, and that's why the world's chasing it. So here's some stats, just generally that I caught when I did a panel in Edmonton at the SMR Forum. It really shocked me. China is building 6 to 10 reactors a year. We're competing with that, right? Russia doing the same thing. India's moving in. The US just passed an executive order under Trump to quadruple nuke and capitalize on focusing on exports. And we are a bit ahead, as our colleagues at OPG would know, of the curve in terms of developing the SMR. We're just a little bit ahead right now, and we should be putting our muscle behind that. And what I think there is that's actually a financing problem. There is no nuclear installation, tool, what have you, that will ever get built in the world without a public-private partnership. That is a fact. Governments play a role because it's big, bankable financing. And so the question is, how do you get the financing partnerships together to ensure that the risk is managed, right? You got to get the capital stack right. So in the US, 14 banks in New York are putting together a funding model. In the UK, you've got the Sizewell C. The Caisse de Dépôt invested in the UK because they had a better capital stack that they put together. So that's our own pension fund, right? And they're not investing here. We need to kind of dive deep into what it takes to manage that risk, both in the upfront sense of things, but also the downstream, to put the right funding equation together. And it's in the billions. And we haven't even, everybody keeps saying we're moving forward, and nobody's really defining what that capital stack looks like. And I would say one thing for sure is cost overruns. My experience in Lower Churchill tells me that is exactly what the UK is banked on. And so have some of these other countries. They're actually managing the cost overrun question here. We should be talking about that heavily as we move forward in this space. As for BC, here's another last thing, okay? Because we all only have a few minutes on this panel. Alex, it wasn't that long ago that the province of Quebec was saying absolutely not to nuclear, right? Very recently, Gentilly 2 is starting to bubble up again. And I find that super interesting. The reason is, in my mind, is because they've started to come around to the fact that, hey, we're running out of power. And to Gaëtan's point, we're financing this at the rate of inflation. It needs to go exponentially, and it's not. And so now people start to search around for magical solutions. And so as far as the province of BC goes, I suspect it's going to be just like anywhere else. When the energy security gets so constrained, it'll start to look at this very heavily. Hopefully that's a bit of helpful comments. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Brian, I'm just invite you to pile on, and then I'm going to ask you about Germany.
Great. I think those are key points about financing that have been raised, and then the supply chain and the possibility of a Canadian made and supported supply chain that will provide us energy security that might make nuclear more attractive than some of these other technologies, and the fact that it can be an economic generator in terms of construction and the costs that go into it. And I just wanted to maybe add to your reading list as well, Alex. We've issued a energy demand study that talks about energy demand moving forward and the level of demand related to AI centers, et cetera, that we'll need in the future. And we've also just completed a workforce study that talks about certain levels of build out that could happen in Canada and what kind of workforce would be needed. Huge needs there, huge almost culture shift in how we develop talent. So those are big considerations if we're going to see this build out happen. And then I think Jay's touched on this a couple of times as well. The regulatory framework that we have right now in competition with other countries probably isn't good enough. We've made a lot of progress towards making more performance based, which means less prescriptive. But it's a system that's been built on CANDO technology, which obviously still exists. But when we're looking at doing different technologies, we have to make sure we have a regulatory system that'll let you build that efficient SMR or micro reactor down the road. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks. Arthur, I wanted to bring you back into this conversation. And I just want to go back to the scale question. When Wes, Sam, and I and the Wet'suwet'en leaders were in Spain, we stood inside a 5 megawatt wind tower. We stood beside, which was 102 meters tall to the center of the blades. We stood at a 5 megawatt solar farm, which looked like it covered about 5 to 10 acres. It's hard to tell exactly how many acres it was. And in West Sam showed a picture to everybody of a 5 megawatt hydro plant. The one that he showed earlier, it was 5 megawatts. So we got a sense of 5 megawatts in these different forms. What do we get out of an SMR? Like, how big is 5 megawatts? How big is 300 megawatts?
You're getting more than that. So if you remember the image I showed you before for the reactor they're building over at Ontario Power Generation, can sort of think of it kind of similar to maybe like a football size field, only a little larger. A lot of it's underground. It's just, should note that the actual vessel itself sits lower. It's sort of being drilled beneath. Good for seismic, I should say. One thing that's very relevant to BC is seismic site classes in areas along the Pacific coast, quite relevant. But you're looking at that case about 300 megawatts. So it's one of the reasons I like to compare it to hydro is that it's essentially hydro that you can build not anywhere, but a lot more flexible in terms of locations. There's a lot of steel and concrete, and there's a lot of safety analysis. A hydro dam failing is bad news bears. There's a lot more of them that have failed over the course of history when you look at things. But that's really sort of the nice comparison is a large hydro dam, but then shrunk to the size where you're looking at about a football field, or in the case of our really large facilities where you're thinking about gigawatts of scale, it would be sort of a large industrial complex if you're thinking about something like Bruce Nuclear. So one of the largest advantages of nuclear overall is the amount of land usage relative to either renewable energy or something else. I think the stat is if you wanted to try to get the world's power from wind energy, you'd have to cover the entire world with wind turbines. It's kind of offhand. That's a little bit sort of a crude analogy, but you are looking at a significant amount of space relative to the way in which relative to the amount of space that's required for nuclear power.
Okay, thanks. I don't know who to ask the question to about Germany, but some of us wonder why is Germany backing away from nuclear power and burning coal?
I'd love to take this one.
Yeah.
If anybody, I don't know if anybody.
Arthur really wants.
I'll start.
I want to.
Okay,
I'd really
Gaëtan's
like to
starting.
take this.
Okay, 1 minute for you, and then Arthur, go.
92 megaton of coal is still being burned per year in Germany, which is probably almost 100 times what we burn in New Brunswick, and we are on the news. So how did they get away with that is because they did abandon their nuclear program. And I do believe I heard the people coming. They did go in Winnipeg when we had this large conference on wind and solar, and he was there and saying that he could do 90-some%. A representative of the government, they could do 98 or 95, 98% wind and solar. It's impossible. It's intermittent. So they have to have gas and coal to be stable, like the graph that Ron showed this morning.
Right. Okay, Arthur, why did they back away from their nuclear?
The German nuclear industry has historically not behaved super well in certain instances, and in many cases lost the kind of the its public's general acceptance. A long time before Fukushima happened. You think about the way nuclear is managed in Canada, like those nice, okay, we have a building, all the nuclear fuel is actually within the actual building. You had the Germans putting some of their used fuel into like salt mines and just like leaving it there to corrode. That's a really great way to make your public really, really, really unhappy at you. Other examples, we think of this sort of our standard water-cooled design